Boatworks today is sponsored by Total Boat and Alexseal Yacht Coatings, as well as supported by the generosity from the beautiful folks over on Patreon. Thank you so much. So welcome back, everybody. Hope you're having a fantastic weekend. My name is Andy with Boatworks today, and this week we're throwing some color on this old girl and we're gonna get her done. Now, before I start mixing up any paint, I need to do the final sanding on this primer. And for doing that, I'm gonna be using a much less coarse paper than what I've used in the past. It's going to be either 320 or 400. I haven't quite decided yet. The 400 feels a little bit too fine, so I think I may actually be leaning towards the 300. But the point of this is to remove every little bit of texture that might be in this primer. Now, although I realize the surface, it looks smooth and it certainly feels smooth, I can 100% guarantee you that it is not where it needs to be in order to start painting. Now, there is texture in the surface of this primer just simply from rolling it on. Now, although it did, roll out very, very smooth, there's still a little bit of texture in there. And even if we had sprayed this, there's still going to be texture from spraying, just not quite as much. So during the sanding process, what we need to do is completely remove any of that texture. And because otherwise, when we go over with our paint, if we don't do that, if we skip this step, you're going to get a ton of orange peel on the surface, and it's going to make the whole job look completely pooched. And in order to highlight the texture in the surface, we're going to be using what's called a guide coat. Now, there's a number of different types of guide coats that you can get. This one happens to be a powder form. This is made by Mirka. But there's also guide coats that you can get in liquid form as well as a spray-on. But essentially what this stuff does is that it's such a fine material that it gets in any little surface defect and settles in on the low spots, so that when you're sanding, in this particular case, this guide coat happens to be black. So basically when we're sanding, if we see any little black speckles anywhere in the surface, that's telling us that the surface is not completely sanded or sanded smooth. So when we're going over it, we're going to apply the guide coat, and then the goal is to completely sand it so that the guide coat is completely removed. Once the guide coat sands away clean, then we know that that particular area of the surface is ready to go. Now, this particular guide coat, it's essentially just a very, very fine powder. It's almost like a graphite powder. I honestly, I don't know what it is, but it's extremely fine. It's a bit messy, easy to use, but at the end of the day, it works very, very well. Now, because this is such a fine powder, I would highly recommend that you wear a respirator when you're doing this, and I'm just going to kind of give you a quick little rundown on how to actually use this stuff. But when you open it up, it doesn't look like there's much in here. I mean, it's basically full is right up to here. Now, when I first got this, I'm thinking, what a ripoff. I mean, this is like almost $35, $40. And I'm thinking, this is dumb, a waste of money. However, this tin, this is probably going to last me the rest of my life. That's how far this stuff goes. Just a little bit goes a very, very long way, and you put it on very, very lightly. So basically, you got a little foam applicator here, kind of drop it down, load up the applicator, and you just literally just rub it on. Not thick. I mean, I don't know how many more times I'm going to have to touch this up, but you're just going to rub it over and essentially turn this surface black. Well, that looks just a wee bit different. Let me zoom in here so you can get a closer look at what I'm talking about here with this surface texture. Let's see if we can get a focus. Okay, so anywhere, all of this texturing that you're seeing in here, this is all the stuff that we want to have completely sanded off. And looking down over the boat, focus, yeah. It is literally over the entire boat. Both this white area as well as what's going to be the dark blue space up on top. So for sanding this down, I think I am actually going to go with the 320 grit. I had originally talked about using 400, but it it just doesn't feel like that it would have enough tooth to bite through this. So I'm gonna get started. At least I'm gonna try it starting with 320. And for the sander, it's just a regular 6-inch DA. It's the Festool. It's RO 150. Now this particular sander has 2 settings. You can either have it on random orbit, or you can have it on Rotex, which is just a straight spinning head. Now for this type of sanding, I'm going to be using the random orbit, just mainly because the Rotex I think is going to be a little bit too aggressive. Now unfortunately, I only have 1 coat of the gray 442 primer on here. Beneath all that is the regular white 442. So when I'm sanding this, at least this gray area, I suspect I'm going to end up sanding through. Hopefully it's only in spots. Whenever you're going to be going over top of this with a dark paint, which this area in gray is going to be what I'm going to be painting over with the royal blue, a dark blue. I forget which color exactly it is. So whenever you're going to be painting with a dark paint, you want to use the dark primer. Whenever you're going to be painting with a light paint, and in this case it's going to be the Fighting Lady Yellow, which is a light color, that's where you're going to want to be using the white primer. So let me get geared up here and see how this goes. All right, now something happened here that I really want to point out. Hopefully this is going to come up on camera. Okay, but anyways, you see these little tracers here? These are what you call pigtails. And although you can't feel them, they will print through in your finished, painted surface here. Now, the reason that happens, it's usually 1 of 2 reasons. Either one, the surface that you're sanding is still a little bit tender, which this, I think this primer actually is, because I didn't finish laying up this gray until last night, about 7 o'clock at 7 p.m. So it's only had a chance to cure overnight, and it's what, 2 o'clock in the afternoon now. So it's not quite as set as I would like. But the other reason, or the other kind of telltale, is that your sandpaper is getting dull. And I've done pretty much a good section here with just a single sheet of this 320, and the pigtail is coming from that little speck right there. That was a lot of sanding. It let me know I'm not a young guy anymore. But anyways, all the sanding is done, and overall I'd say it looks good, maybe like 95, 98%. There are a few places where I did actually sand all the way through down to the glass. Now, at this point, I think I'm just gonna keep on marching forward with it. Typically, if this were a paid job, typically if I were to sand through an area, basically I would just highlight it and then come back and then retouch up with the primer. Generally speaking, you want to always be applying paint over top of primer. That's where they're going to give you your best color. It's going to give you your best consistency with the color, and just overall, that's just the way you want to do it ideally. However, a few spots, maybe half a dozen or maybe even a dozen spots, I actually did sand all the way through. Most places was just on the verge of sanding through, but didn't quite go through. But that does make a difference whether you're thin or whether you actually burn through. But here, let me show you what I'm talking about. Okay, like right here, obviously that's a burn through. But you come over here, even though you can still kind of see the red through here, there's still primer over top. So this is still good. Now, ideally, I was hoping to be able to keep all of the as much of the dark gray over this area as possible, because this is going to be that dark blue. But I don't know. We'll see how it turns out. Most likely, if I do get some bleed through from where I sanded through, or just because I'm going over top of a white primer instead of the dark gray, more than likely it's just going to require another coat, maybe 2. Well, this is only getting 3 coats total, so hopefully it's going to be enough. So, but other than that, I'd say everything looks pretty good. So right now, it's about 7 o'clock on whatever the hell day is it. It's the day before Thanksgiving. So I'm going to get this wiped down, and I'm going to get the tape laid up, and then I'm going to call this a night because I'm wiped out. Tomorrow's another day. I'll be in here painting this Turkey Day morning. So today's the day. Today is what all of the repairs, the sanding, the grinding, the glassing, the fairing, all of that has come down to this. Today is paint day. Now, just as a quick recap, in case you missed some of the other previous videos, the whole point of doing this project was to test out this little guy right here. Now, Alexseal came out with a new rolling additive this spring, or this summer, something that's been in development for quite a while, and they finally got it to the point where they're able to push it out to the public. So what this additive is supposed to do is basically change the way that you're able, like DIY, able to paint your own boats. In the past, way that it's always had to be done DIY style is basically rolling and tipping. And that's not always the easiest. Everything just has to be absolutely perfect for that paint to actually flow out. Well, this is their solution for that. So the way that this is supposed to work, now I haven't tried it yet. I haven't played around with it. I haven't cracked the can, nothing. This is going to be my first time doing it. But the way this is supposed to work is basically there is no more tipping. You mix it in, and you roll it out, and you let it work its magic. So today, we're going to be running that through its paces here. Now, I'm going to be doing this boat in two different, in a 2-color scheme. On the very, very bottom, which is what we've been working on, I'm going to be doing that in a dark color, as per request from everybody a few videos ago. The color that I decided to go with is going to be Infinity Blue, and it's honestly it's because it's the darkest color that I have. And we all know that the darker the color, the more challenging it can be to actually get it to look good. So that's the reason I'm going with Infinity Blue on this. So right now, when I left last night, I got the bottom, the area that we're going to be painting, I got all that wiped down, and I haven't touched it. So from now on, going forward, I will be wearing gloves anytime I touch this boat. I don't want to get any oils from my hands, nothing like that. I don't want to contaminate the surface. The last thing I'm going to do is I need to tack rag this hull. I'm probably going to tack it off 2, 3, 4 times. I know that I'm going to get dust in here. I haven't gone through my normal cleaning protocol that I usually do in the shop here when I'm getting ready to paint. Reason being is because that process usually takes close to a week. Wiping down the walls, hosing down the floor, just dusting everything. I don't have the time to do that for this. And so I am fully anticipating having some dust float in here. Hopefully it's going to be kept to a minimum, but it is what it is. So I want to throw that one out there up front, just so we're all on the same page as far as expectations. I'm also going to not be surprised if we have a couple flies that do some kamikaze bombs on here. It's that time of the year. Flies are moving in, and it's cold outside. It's warm in here, so they're not stupid. They know where they want to be. So I also expect to have some flies in there. But whatever, it is what it is. Now I'm going to be mixing this paint up essentially at a 2:1:1 ratio. So that's going to be 2 parts paint, 1 part converter, and then 1 part reducer. Now, because we're going to be using this 5018 additive here, or the rolling additive, the way that I'm going to mix this is going to be a little bit different than how you would typically do it. Normally, you just basically put in your 2:1:1, you mix it up, and you're ready to go. Well, with this additive, from what I understand, the best way to do this is to mix your paint and your converter together, and then put in whatever amount is required of the rolling additive. Now, if you're doing a 1 quart mix, so whatever 1 quart total mix to include the reducer, you would use 10 milliliters of this additive, so not very much. Well, the size area that I'm going to be rolling here is very small, so I'm not going to mix up a full quart, which kind of makes getting the correct ratio of this additive a little bit tricky. So what I think I'm going to do here is I'm going to put up 4 ounces, 2 ounces, and 2 ounces. And then that's going to break down to 1.25 milliliters of this. Now, I think I've got a way to get this fairly accurate, but we shall see. But first things first, let me get the paint and the converter mixed together. And the additive. We're going to let that sit for 15 minutes before we add the reducer. I guess that's kind of the trick. Now that anytime you're working with primer and paint, you always run all this right through a strainer. So I've got 4 ounces of the base, so that means I'm going to put in 2 ounces of the 5012 brush converter. So that'll bring me up to 6 ounces. I think that's going to do it. Now, with the volume of paint that I'm going to be mixing up here, I need to figure out how to get 1.25 milliliters of this. Now, the smallest reading on this little medicine cup here is 2.5 milliliters. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to fill this up to 2.5. I'm going to draw it off into this syringe, and then find basically the halfway mark on the syringe, and that's going to be what I'm going to pump into here, which should be pretty darn close to 1.25. All right, now I'm going to stir this and then let it sit for 15 minutes before I add the reducer. That's what I was told to do by Alexseal, and that's what I'm going to do. So now I'm going to cap this, again, with some paper towel just to make sure nothing floats in here. And in the meantime, I've got 15 minutes. I got to start the clock, but while I'm waiting, I'm going to get the hull tacked off with a tack rig. Now, the tack rig, that I want to use, or that I'm going to use, it's not your standard woodworking type of a tack rig, like you get at the hardware store. This is a tack rig that's made by Alexseal, and it's designed. It's a paint tack rig, essentially. It doesn't feel like it's very sticky, but that's what paint tack rigs are. And while I'm waiting, I'm also going to get my roller prepped. Now, these are the rollers I'm going to be using. And again, I'll have links for this below in the description. These work really, really well, but they do kind of shed lint a little bit. So to try and minimize that, I'm just going to tape the crap out of this a few times and hope that the tape can pull out any of the loose bits. And I'm going to do this 3 or 4 times. It should help, right? All right, it has been 15 minutes. I think it's time to get this party started here. I'm going to give this one last stir, and then I'm going to mix in my reducer. Now again, going back to when we were mixing this, I put 4 ounces of the base, 2 ounces of the converter, and then 1.5 milliliters of the 5018 rolling additive. Now at this point, it's had its chance to do its induction time, I guess. So now it's time to mix in the reducer, and I'm going to be putting in 2 ounces of the reducer. Now I will say, this is a small batch, a very small batch. Now if we were doing a larger hull or a larger boat, I would not take and dump this entire mix into the tray. The reason for that is that, especially if you're going to be working outside, you may have to come back and occasionally add a little bit more reducer into your overall mix. So what I would suggest is basically pour out a little bit, cap this, and then when the paint in the tray is used up, depending on how it was going, if you need to add a little bit of reducer, you can throw a little splash in here, give it a mix, pour out a little bit more. And you can just keep repeating that process until you finish the boat. But I don't think I'm going to run into that on this project because it's such a small area. Now, when I'm loading up this roller, I want to have very, very little paint actually on this roller. A little bit of this paint goes a very, very long ways. So I'm going to load it up, and then I'm going to try and push as much as I can back off. I'm putting a fair amount of pressure down on the roller. Now, when I'm doing this, because I'm working here by myself, I'm going to need to have a start and a stop area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically draw a little line here. I'm going to start here, work my way down and around, and then finally come back to here. Now, if I do have a little bit of overlap on my start and stop finish, this is going to be the area that's going to give me, I guess, the smallest amount of work to blend these two in, basically wet sand it out and polish it in, versus if I were to run it, say, lengthwise with the boat. You want this layer to go on thin, and I do not want to overwork this. the more I roll over with the more I roll over an area, the faster the solvents are going to evaporate out of this mix. So basically roll it out as evenly as you can and leave it be. I'll be damned, you can just see, visibly just see the bubbles popping out of here. Well, first coat went down, and I went through every drop of the paint that I mixed up. So on this size hull, at least for the area that we did, it was 4, 5, 6, roughly 8 ounces, 8 mixed ounces. I think I'm going to do a little bit of a larger batch on round 2. But as I expected, there is some dust in here, but holy hell did this stuff flow out. And it's going to continue to flow out. Last time I did a test like this without the additive, it looked good when I was done. I came back the following morning, the paint tightened up, it looked fantastic. But let me turn the camera around so you can kind of see how things are looking right now. And as expected, especially when you're working with a dark color, you are not going to get full coverage with just one coat. Typically dark coats I like to do a minimum of 3, sometimes 4, just so you have a little bit of wiggle room in case you have to come back and do some future repairs. But for round 1, especially for certain areas that I was sanded right down to the bare fiberglass, the coverage that I'm getting on here so far looks very, very promising. So it is a few days later, and off camera I applied 2 more additional coats. So right now there's a total of 3 coats on here. Now each of these coats were laid up over 3 coats over 3 consecutive days, and there was no sanding in between. So with Alexseal, as long as you're able to get a next coat on within 12 to 16 hours, actually you can go shorter than 12 hours, but roughly within that time frame, you do not have to sand before you can go over top with another coat. Now, the first coat that I rolled out, the flow on that with this additive, the 5018 additive, it came out beautifully smooth. However, because it was just one coat, I didn't get full hide or full coverage from the paint. So coat number 2 helped a lot with that, and as far as how that flowed out, the orange peel was very minimal. It was, if you looked really hard, you could kind of see a little bit of peel on the surface. Now by coat number 3, it was becoming a little bit more obvious. Now again, remember, this is with no sanding in between any coats. And just to kind of show you how things are looking here right now. Let's see. So hopefully the camera's gonna pick this up, but you can kind of see a good part of this is just dust, which I knew was going to happen. But for the most part, there is some orange peel visible, but not very much. Now, something else that is going to be fairly apparent here is that I still do not have full hide or full coverage from this paint, even after 3 coats. And well, the main reason for that is the areas where I'm still able, I'm still getting some bleed through. Those are the areas where I sanded through the primer, both the gray as well as the white, and ended up bringing it back down to bare fiberglass. Now, as I mentioned earlier in this video, now if I were on an actual job, in areas where that happened, I would have come back and touched up that primer so that when it was all said and done, when it was all sanded and ready to start painting, there would have been no bare spots anywhere. But time being what it is, I didn't have that luxury, and I chose not to, just so we could kind of see what kind of a difference having primer versus not having primer will make on certain areas when you're rolling this material out. So my plan going forward here is I'm going to pull this tape and basically clean everything down. I'm going to retape because right now I'm starting to get ready to start laying down the yellow. And then if time allows today, I'm going to try and get 2 coats of the Fighting Lady yellow down. I'm going to need to wait 3 to 4 hours in between each coat, and well, that's just going to depend on what time it is by the time I get all this prep done and the first coat down. Worst case scenario, I'm going to get everything prepped, 1 coat on tonight, and then first thing tomorrow morning, coat number 2, and then I'm going to let everything cure for 24 hours. I think we are ready. I can't quite tell if the area that I'm going to be painting now has more or less surface area than what I did with the blue. So just to be on the safe side, I'm going to mix up more than what I'm going to need. So again, this paint, when we're rolling it on, it gets mixed 2 to 1 to 1. That's 2 parts paint, 1 part reducer, and 1 part converter. Now, again, the special little additive that we're going to be throwing in here is the A5018, which is their rolling additive that Kea actually just came out this spring. So the color on this is going to be Fighting Lady Yellow. Ooh, that looks good. Is it weird to say that? And then as far as the quantities, I'm going to pour out 8 ounces of the 501 base, and then 4 ounces of the converter, 4 ounces of the reducer, and then as far as the additive, that's going to work out to 2.5 milliliters, so not very much at all. Now, just when I was mixing the blue, I'm not going to dump everything in the pot and kind of give it a stir. I'm going to mix this in a very particular way. So I've already got my 8 ounces of base. Now I'm going to throw in the 4 ounces of the converter, and then I'm going to throw in this additive. I'm going to stir that all up, let it sit for 15 minutes. After that time has passed, then I'm going to add in the reducer, give it a last minute stir, and we should be ready to roll. So I've got a little bit of the 501 that just won't make its way out of the strainer here. So I'm just shy of 8 ounces, so I figured by the time I wash it down with the converter, we should be all set. Yes, converter. Okay, so I'm looking to bring this up to 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, now this rolling additive, I am not going to run through the strainer because it's such a small amount that I have to add in here. I don't want the strainer itself to kind of hold on to anything. So using a little children's cough medicine cup, I need 2.5 milliliters. Okay, I'm going to give this a quick mix. Let this sit covered for 15 minutes, and then I'll come back, throw in the 4 ounces of the brushing reducer, and I think we're ready to roll. So I've got everything mixed up. I threw in the reducer and gave it a stir, and it's capped. But when I'm rolling it out, at least on this part of the hull, I think this is going to be a little bit tricky, just because there's such a curvature here, and it's not only curving this way, it's also curving lengthwise. So when I'm laying down my roller, say that if I'm holding the roller this way, there's only a very small part of the roller that's actually touching the hull. So I think what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to hold the roller horizontal, basically unload the roller going in this direction, and then after I've got the majority of it out, then I'm going to come back and make one final basically light rolling motion to take care of this edge along the bottom as well as along the top. Now remember, when I'm rolling this out, I want to work this material as little as possible, because the more I work it, the faster the solvents evaporate and the less flow out time I'm going to get out of this mixture of paint. So I think that's going to be the plan going into it. I may end up adjusting halfway through, but at least to get started, I think I'm going to make my initial movements this way, and then I'll come in and do a final tip going this way to get the tops and the bottoms. So I don't know. Let's give it a shot. And also, because we're going to be painting on a vertical surface here, something I need to be very, very mindful about is making sure I don't have too much material on this roller and lay the paint on too thick, because, well, that's going to end up with like sags and runs and that kind of thing, which is no bueno. So I'm going to load this up pretty well. I'm going to make sure that the whole thing is actually, saturated with paint. But then I'm going to try and push out. I mean, I'm pushing down fairly hard. I want to try and roll as much of this paint back out of this roller, just so that I know that I'm going to be able to be rolling out a nice, thin, even layer on the hull of this little boat. All right, it's go time. All right, now when I'm starting this, I'm not going to make my first roll marks right here on the edge, because what if I have too much paint on here and I don't have anywhere else to kind of move it to unload this roller. So I'm going to come in about 8-10 inches and make my initial rolls like this. Again, staying away from the top and the bottom until I can start to see that it's actually rolling out nice and thin now. Once I get to this point, then I'll come up to the top and come down to the bottom as much as, well, at least as close as I'm comfortable doing. And here where I started, where it's a little bit thicker, now I'm able to pick that up with the roller and even it out. And just for good measure, I'm going to make one very light roll mark coming down. And this is basically just the weight of the roller itself. I'm not pushing down on it one bit. Same thing here. I'm not going to start here. I'm going to start over about 8, 10, 12 inches. So with the exception of about a dozen flies that decided to end their days by dive bombing some wet paint, this coat came out fantastic. Now granted, this is still only after one coat, but it flowed out perfectly. No bubbles. I did have one small sag up at the front here. I don't know if the glare is going to be able to pick it up, but it's right, kind of like right in there. I don't know, maybe you'll be able to see it, maybe you won't. But it was just one very, very small sag. Now I'm hoping that coat number 2, which I'm going to be putting on here shortly. I've already got the paint mixed up. It's sitting in the bucket for its 15 minutes doing its thing till I add the reducer. But I'm hoping coat number 2 is going to make a pretty significant difference as far as the hide. And by that I'm referring to, areas like this where you can still see, parts of where I ended up sanding down to bare glass. It's a little easier to see up in here. But hopefully we're going to get a lot better hide out of this second coat. Now again, just look at this. It's like a spray job. And that's no exaggeration. That additive is money. Well, it is the following day, and the paint has had a chance to sit overnight and do its thing, and overall, I think it looks pretty good. As far as coverage, I'd say we got maybe 95, 98% coverage, which is pretty good considering there were quite a few patches that I accidentally sanded through the primer all the way down to the bare fiberglass. Now, as far as how it flowed out, all things considered, it flowed out very well. Now, there is still some orange peel that's visible, and you can kind of hopefully pick that up in the glare here. That for applying 2 coats with no sanding in between, this orange peel it's much less noticeable than what you would typically see on, say, 2 coats, no sanding. So now going forward, what the plan is I'm going to pull the tape and give everything a sand down with, I think I'm going to go with 400 grit on this, just to give it a final knockdown for the final top coat, which is going to be the finish coat. So yeah, I mean, I just got a long day of sanding ahead of me, so time to get started. So as you saw, I finished up the sanding last night and then came in this morning and did all the prep work. Got everything cleaned and retaped, and I believe it's about ready to go. I am going to go over it one more time with a tack rig just to make sure that it's as dust-free as possible. Now, since this is going to be the finish coat, this is going to be the last coat of paint that we're going to be putting on here for each of the colors. Cleanliness is next to godliness, all right? When I was cleaning off this blue, I believe I went over this probably close to a dozen times with the surface cleaner. Basically kept on wiping until the rag was not picking up any more color. And that took, like I said, about a dozen times. I'm going to be doing the blue tomorrow. The yellow is what we're going to be doing today. So right now, I think we're all set. The paint is mixed up. It's doing its little 15-minute, spa treatment in the cup, and then we're going to add in the reducer. Now, the yellow, I think I commented on this the very first time that I opened up the yellow. That particular color is much thicker than the blue. I'm guessing it has something to do with the level of pigment that's needed to create that yellow, but it's thicker than the blue. And I could tell when I was rolling it out on the first couple coats, although it went out very, very well, I think I'm going to reduce it just a little bit more. Right now the mixes that I've been doing were 8 ounces of the paint, 4 ounces of the catalyst, or the converter, and then 4 ounces of the reducer. I think I'm going to do a little bit closer to 5 ounces on the reducer, just to kind of loosen it up a little bit. I want this stuff to have plenty of time to flow out. I want it to have enough open time for the bubbles and any air things from the rollers. I want them to be able to pop, and I want this to look as good as it can. Now, I don't see any way that this adding a little bit extra reducer is going to cause any problems, but I guess we'll see. It shouldn't. It really shouldn't. So, yeah, we got to wait 10 more minutes for the paint to do its thing. We're going to mix it up and start rolling out. as you can see here, I just finished laying up the blue about 3 hours ago. Just finished pulling the tape, and I gotta say, I'm giving this 2 very healthy thumbs up. Now the blue is what we just did, and I mean, let's just be honest here. This stuff flowed out like a high-end spray job, and this was just rolled on with a just an off-the-shelf roller. All right, now I just want to throw a couple points out here. First off, there are some blemishes in here, no doubt, and it's almost entirely from areas where I sanded sanded too far on the primer. Now you've heard me kind of harp about this throughout this video. Now, did I maybe oversand some of the spots of primer on purpose just to kind of prove a point as far as what kind of impact that could have on your overall finish? I mean, this is a demo boat after all, and you know, I mean, it's really hard to explain these kinds of things without actually showing it. Now, I don't want to touch it because this is still, well, that's a demo boat, right? Touched it. But overall, setting that one issue aside, throughout the top of this boat, this looks amazing. It does. No special tricks, nothing. And honestly, since this 5018 additive has come out, I've had a number of people send me messages, you know, through either direct email or through Facebook, Instagram, that kind of thing. Send me you know, pictures of projects that they have done using this additive, and every single one they followed this outline. Basically, you get 2 build coats, let it cure, sand it down with 400, and then do your final finish coat. Every one that I have seen has turned out just like this, and these are people that have never painted a boat in their life. So Alexseal is onto something with this additive. Honestly, if I had to add any kind of criticisms about it, I'd be hard pressed to come up with any, to be honest. I mean, this was my first time using it. You know, granted, I've done a fair amount of painting, but it's mostly been all spraying. I haven't done a whole lot of rowing. And I gotta say, the results that I'm seeing here, again, in less than ideal situation. Yes, I am indoors, but I didn't do anything with overall cleaning, dusting, or anything. And there is some dust in here, but that could, if you wanted to, that could easily be polished out. Flies, obviously, you know, those are always an ongoing issue inside of a building here in the fall time. But overall, when we're just looking at or critiquing the actual finish and the flow of the paint, 2 thumbs up. I mean, honestly, I have really no criticisms about it. So what I think I'm going to end up doing for next week is, because there's been a lot of little nuances in bits of information that have kind of come out on video over the past 3 or 4 videos, I think. So I think what I'm going to do next weekend, just so that I'm going to have an easy place to direct people when they have follow-up questions as far as any particulars that I did on the mixing or rollers or anything like that. I think next week then I'm just going to put together kind of a bit of a highlight, kind of things you need to know if you're going to actually get into painting your boat using this product. So that'll be kind of a short video for next weekend, and then after that it's going to be back to the birdie. So keep an eye out for that. I think that'll be in the long run end up being very, very, very helpful for folks. So, and also it's a little bit self-serving for me because, well, I promised my wife that we would have all of our house put back together for Christmas, and well, I'm still hanging drywall in the kitchen, so I need something that's not going to be quite so time-consuming for content for next week to put together. So, yeah, I think that's it. So, with that said, I hope you enjoyed this series. I hope you found a lot of this information very, very helpful. And if you did, please hit that thumbs up button. If you have any boating buddies or people that you know of are going to be going through topic or projects similar to this, forward them onto my channel. I'd love to have them on board. If you have any questions, comments, I'd leave them down below. I'll do my best to get back with you. And yeah, as always, thank you for your time. Thanks for watching. I'm gonna go have a beer. Have a good night, and I'll see you next week.
This has been a Boatworks Today production.